Hello all, I'm Dina Wilkie and this is my disaster comparison presentation. I elected to compare the top 2 weather and climate disasters that we saw in 2021. This is based upon data from the National Centers for Environmental Information. Number 1 being Hurricane Ida, which made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 4 hurricane and moved through to the northeast and produced several tornadoes and other severe weather. NCEI again estimates a $75 billion cost and 96 deaths were related. Secondly, in early 2021 was a cold wave accompanied by a handful of winter storms, 2 of which were dubbed Winter Storm Uri and Viola. This was, again, geographically widespread throughout northwest, central, and eastern U.S. states. NCEI estimates $24 billion in cost. There was a total of 226 related deaths. These winter storms resulted in record snowfall and low temperatures, which catastrophically impacted the Deep South in particular. The Texas power crisis, as it's become known, happened due to their isolated electrical grid, which much can be said about, but they had to institute rolling blackouts. Pictured here are Texas residents in line to fill their propane tanks. From an overall incident management standpoint, mitigation measures for Hurricane Ida varied across the regions. For example, New Orleans can likely credit post-Katrina improvements, but New York unfortunately saw their stormwater infrastructure fail. There was a tiered response, and core competencies demonstrated from public information and warning to operational coordination. There were early communications from FEMA down to local emergency management, and National Guard and many an NGO aided in response efforts. Of note, both New York and New Jersey had their first ever flash flood emergencies, and they, along with 6 southern states, saw federal disaster declarations. Mitigation to response for the cold wave winter storms. A couple items of note. Texas did have a Homeland Security and Emergency Management cold weather sheltering plan in place, which they activated in phases. And additionally, in the realm of mutual aid and agreements, they were able to make a 1 million gallon purchase of water from out of state. This just highlights some of the key metrics of the Austin area response specifically. Zooming in on human impact, Hurricane Ida, again, although much better outcomes than Katrina, did still leave its mark. The town of Grand Isle, for example, was essentially rendered uninhabitable, and millions did experience widespread and long power outages. The cold wave and winter storms deaths had myriad causes. It resulted in extensive water damage due to burst pipes and severely limited food and water access. Again, Texans especially experienced very disruptive power loss as well as disruptions to their water service. Now, as far as business impact, estimates do vary. I saw a range of them in my research, but most notably, Gulf Coast oil production was nearly halted, and the agricultural sector was greatly affected, not only via damaged crops, but also delayed shipments due to the coastal location. To compare the business impact for the cold wave winter storms, again, a lot of infrastructure damage that was just not able to withstand the impact of the snow accumulation and freezing temperatures, which naturally resulted in supply chain disruptions and also agricultural losses. In Texas, they cited losses of over $608 million, and that was just from Winter Storm Uri alone. Now, bringing it to lessons learned. You could say that for Hurricane Ida, that picked up where Hurricane Katrina's lessons learned left off. In other regions, such as New York, it became more readily apparent the limited efficacy of flood maps. In their case, of course, the failure of the stormwater systems. Those aren't accounted for in the pre-existing flood maps, and so that can be very limiting. And furthermore, these hurricanes continue to show the importance of continued coastal risk management. Lessons learned for the cold wave and winter storms, which was certainly a more unprecedented situation. General consensus would be insufficient planning and inadequate preparation. Ultimately, this is due to unfamiliarity and really underestimation of cold weather and its potential impacts. I also saw equity concerns that were voiced as far as preparedness communications and the response resources that were made available to certain demographics. Furthermore, to touch on the benefits of exercising, this comes from the City of Austin and Travis County's After Action Report and Improvement Plan, their survey results. Just under 24% of respondents cited that they did participate in winter storm training and/or exercises within the year prior to the event's occurrence. And of those, just over 90% did report that this provided them relevant preparation for their assigned position during Winter Storm Uri in particular. In conclusion, it bears mentioning these disasters were concurrent with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, cascading impacts had a lot to do with already scarce resources and strained systems. Both events affected most community lifelines, so there was a lot of work to be done to restore those as soon as possible. As always, the especially vulnerable populations, such as the disabled, elderly, and low income, were disproportionately affected. Ultimately, as weather events, these both can be tied to climate change, which means there's an impact to risk assessment. This outweighs historical data, for instance, and warrants further mitigation considerations.